As I'm sure you've heard and seen by now, this weekend just past was the first part of the DC Fandome, a live-streamed, free-entry, DC-only mini Comic-Con of sorts, watched around the world no doubt by fans and skeptics alike. As a long-standing fan of comic books and graphic novels who has spent way too much of the last 3 decades or so immersing himself in the deep lore, multitude of interpretations and plethora of stories and characters on offer from the likes of DC, I took it upon myself to watch the entire show. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm more than aware of the issues inherent in modern and indeed less contemporary comics and their cinematic and televisual interpretations. But cynicism aside, I actually found myself somewhat more excited for the Fandome than I'd initially thought I would be. While comics are still big business, it's no secret that superhero movies and TV shows are top of the pile when it comes to financial returns, and have been consistently for over 20 years at this point. It's also no secret that in this regard, DC's chief competitor Marvel have indeed been ruling the roost when it comes to such adaptations, with the behemoth that was Avengers ENDGAME acting as the jewel in a record-breaking, money-shitting crown, taking close to $3 billion at the box office and becoming the highest-grossing movie of all time. While it could be argued that DC have had much better success in the TV market, with the Arrowverse, Gotham, and even less contemporary examples, such as the excellent Smallville, all arguably seeing much greater success than shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Marvel's huge lineup of upcoming Disney Plus shows, which include Loki, WandaVision, and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, are clearly looking to provide some stern competition. So then, knowing all of this, it should come as little surprise that much of the Fandome was dedicated to DC's upcoming film, TV, and streaming projects, with video games bringing up the rear and comics ironically occupying the least talked about position on the roster. So what would DC show us? What surprises would be in store? And what would it all mean for the multiverse of worlds and beloved characters going forward? Interestingly, it seems out of their missteps, they may have shown themselves to be the company sticking closest to the source material, and such a situation may just yield them an advantage against their chief competitor who, after almost 25 films and several TV shows, may soon come up against their greatest adversary yet. The Avengers may have defeated Thanos, but can they continue to conquer audience fatigue? Okay, so let's not misrepresent the situation here. Marvel movies will continue to succeed and make money, and deservedly so. What they've done with the MCU is unprecedented, and has also changed the world of action movies forever. Much like after The Matrix's release in 1999, when slow motion and martial arts were seemingly in every movie that came out, now the measure of a franchise's success seems to be if a cinematic universe can be created out of it. But here's the thing, one of the reasons the MCU movies work is because of such a focus on continuity. Regardless of the subject matter, the filmmakers care enough to connect and tell an overarching narrative, with characters crossing over and coming together when needed. Let me tell you from experience, comic book fans love deep lore and continuity, and I can attest to that through my own personal passion for such elements. There's a reason why every time there's a reboot in comics, a giant crossover event is created, which allows for all pre-established lore to be kept in the canon. If they thought we didn't care, they would simply say, it's all a reboot, forget all the stuff that came before. But they don't. They keep it as part of an extended multiverse in some form, allowing for it to be remembered and even returned to in the future. The problem with this is that traditional movie franchises are much more finite, and therefore actors must hang up the suits through age or other reasoning. Trends move on, and the landscape will once again shift. Such occurrences of course occur in comics too, but often the essence of a character endures through different ages, interpretations and reinventions. It's a different art form, and one that cannot be completely converted into an endless run of movie sequels without succumbing to fatigue eventually. But this is where the Fandome showed us that DC have in fact been rallying against these traditional interpretive concepts from the start, through intentional reasoning or bad planning, who knows, but it certainly makes for an interesting future. Allow me to explain. During the DC panels, we saw 3 different cinematic versions of Batman, all being played by big stars in big productions concurrently. To my knowledge, such an event has never happened, or at least has never happened with Batman, in the almost 80 years since he first made the leap from comic book to screen. In the next 2 years, we will see Ben Affleck once again don the cowl in both the long-rumoured Snyder Cut as well as the upcoming Flash movie, Michael Keaton reprised the role that made him known, and newcomer to the character Robert Pattinson in Matt Reeves' The Batman. Add to this that we saw Kevin Conroy play an older Kingdom Come style Bruce Wayne in the Crisis on Infinite Earths CW crossover event recently. David Mizzou's Bruce Wayne end his journey as the Dark Knight in the Gotham finale at the end of last year, and Ian Glenn portray the character in Titans in the more recent seasons. A decade or so ago, so many iterations of a DC character existing on our screens concurrently would have been unthinkable. It is well known that during Smallville's run, Batman and Bruce Wayne couldn't even be named in the show for fear of intellectual property confusion on the part of the viewer, and this is just one of many examples. But whether through intentional choice or through the need to reboot failed attempts at adaptations quickly, the multiverse has become the order of the day in DC movies and TV, and it may just be exactly what the Doctor ordered. Do you get it? Doctor man. I know. It's a DC property now, right? The DC multiverse as a concept has existed for a long time in the comics, but it would really be the 1961 Flash issue 123 titled Flash of Two Worlds that would really solidify the concept. In the story, Barry Allen accidentally travels to an alternate reality by means of his abilities, where he meets Jay Garrick, another iteration of the Flash from DC's older, so-called Golden Era, who had appeared in issues that began in the early 1940s. Jump forward to January 2020, and it's ironic then that it would be Ezra Miller's Barry Allen from the so-called DCEU and Grant Gustin's Barry Allen from CW's Arrowverse that would be the ones to meet on screen for the first time and acknowledge the existence of such a multiverse on our TV and cinema screens. Such a concept was once so leaned into during DC's Fandome that there was even an entire panel dedicated to its explanation and exploration, as well as what it could mean going forward for DC movies and TV shows, and how they could interact and connect. So, I mentioned up top that DC have found themselves in a position where they are indeed the ones creating a more faithful adaptation of the comic book landscape in films and TV, and I feel that that statement probably needs a little more explanation. You see, this doesn't mean that DC movies are better movies, or even represent better interpretations of their chosen heroes, than Marvel or any of their competitors. But what it does mean is that multiple iterations of heroes, and indeed villains, coexisting without disrupting an overall continuity is how it's been done in comics for decades now, and DC movies and TV are much closer to this type of structure than any of their competitors as they lean ever more into the multiverse concept. I love the Batfleck, despite having some issues with the movies in which he appears, but I also love Keaton's Batman, in no small part because it was the first time I remember seeing a comic book character whom I already loved so dearly be brought to life so vividly on the screen. Likewise, I'm very much looking forward to the Batinbat's Batman. Thank you, Mr. Sunday Movies, for that naming convention. Because I think that by the looks of the early teaser, it has the opportunity to be one of the best Batman movies ever made. The thing is, the precedent now being set by DC is that I'm free to enjoy all of these interpretations. It's not a one-course deal anymore. It's a Batman buffet. Oh, so terrible. Such a structure mirrors the way I've been consuming comics for years. I would read Death in the Family or Nightfall, as well as the Batman animated series comic book, and Gotham by Gaslight or Hush or The Long Halloween. I knew many of these were taking place in different continuities, existing as a larger collection of realities, and so I was free to enjoy them all. Now, I am far too cynical to think this was DC's plan from the start, but I do have to commend them for leaning so hard into this as a concept. As a DC fan and lover of lore and comic book history, it changes my relationship with the art form, from feeling like I missed the old version to the old and the new version are still valid canon. If you don't like the Snyder Cut, check out the Batman. If you don't like them, you could watch Gotham or the Dark Knight trilogy. And guess what? They're all coexisting universes, meaning sequels and possibilities can continue despite whatever new stuff might come out, seeking to reinvent or reinterpret the character. Also, Batman is just one example, and this is true of all heroes and villains, with multiple iterations of Superman, the Joker, Deadshot, to name a few, all already having been established across multiple shows and movies in recent years. So now let's take a moment to look at Marvel. Since 2008, Marvel Studios has not only completely revolutionized the superhero movie, but has also recontextualized what a successful action movie and action franchise is. Moreover, it has done this so confidently and with such precision that one cannot help but admire its execution. Remember, it wasn't so long ago that Daredevil and Elektra were what passed for superhero blockbusters, but they seem worlds away from the likes of Iron Man and the Avengers. But here's the thing about such success, and being the master of your craft, how do you maintain it? Let's look at an example for comparison in a different medium. The Call of Duty franchise basically redefined the modern first-person shooter and multiplayer landscapes. For a while, almost every game that came out, be it AAA or AA, had a multiplayer mode shoved into it, And this was pretty much all because of the success seen by COD from around 2007 onwards. However, while it's still a juggernaut to this day, recent years have seen its sales and popularity succumb to franchise fatigue and diminishing returns. While reinvention and iteration has been utilised and has garnered some success, the fundamentals of the experience have remained the same, and so, like anything, what goes up must come down. Profits and popularity cannot grow indefinitely, and everything at some point must come to an end. Such a problem is one now faced by Marvel Studios. Its comics have continued to endure in no small part because, like DC, they have been able to develop different interpretations of beloved characters, sometimes simultaneously. However, in film, the aforementioned focus on continuity that has served Marvel so well may now mean that they are running out of places for the story to go. After all, what threat is bigger than Thanos in that universe? Such a concept also extends to the interpretations of the villains and heroes themselves. No fan of the MCU is debating who their favourite Iron Man is, because there is only one. And now such fans, myself included, cannot see anyone else playing that role. Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man. I mean, he said so himself several times. However, with Batman or Superman, such debates are already raging amongst fans. And if one road ends in failure for the popular hero or villain, a reboot is now sanctioned programming. And while it could engender a different kind of fatigue if overused, this can be mediated by how different each attempt has license to be from the last. Don't get me wrong, it's by no means a fix-all when it comes to storytelling, but it is certainly going to see these two approaches diverge more, and I for one think that's very interesting. It was clear at the outset of the DC EU that the studio was eager to replicate Marvel's success, often demanding reshoots, re-edits, tonal changes, and even plot changes to try and make the content much more in line with their competitors. However, movements like Release the Snyder Cut and successes like Joker have allowed them to see that innovation trumps imitation every time. I'd like to wrap things up by saying that this is not an anti-Marvel or pro-DC video. Despite finding the latter of those two companies' characters resonate with me a little more, both have provided and will continue to provide hours and hours of entertainment for me across all mediums. In fact, it's difficult to argue with the level of quality seen in Marvel's movies in comparison to DC's over the last decade. Toxic fandom is fucking awful and serves to only stop enjoyment of any property. So let's fuck that concept off right now. Like what you like, debate and discuss, don't be a prick. Simple. Also, let's not get it twisted. This is not an advertisement for the wonders of the DC Fandome event either. A whole lot of that event was cringy, fluff piece nonsense that really could have been removed completely. I mean, what the fuck is this crap? Still, having said all of this, as someone who's consumed so much relevant media when it comes to this topic, I find myself in an interesting position now. While DC movies have been very hit and miss compared to Marvel's consistent high bar of quality, in a post-Endgame world, I find myself approaching fatigue with the MCU and wonder how they're going to keep me and other fans interested. Conversely, I find myself excited by the prospect of what DC can do with a fully functioning cinematic multiverse and what surprises that may bring. I guess only time will tell, but personally, I could wait a little longer for some more Avengers, but I definitely can't wait for more Batman.